Welcome to another episode of Uplifting Conversations. I'm your host, Toussaint Bailey, and today I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Taj Ahmad Eldridge.
The word that I keep coming back to is uplifting. I have this conviction based on my lived experience that uplifting people or the planet doesn't have to be draining. It can actually feel uplifting to the person who's making that impact.
I was just talking to Taj before we came on about how there's no way I can possibly touch on everything that he's doing, and so we'll get into a little bit of that, and most importantly, we'll find out about the story that has brought him to the place where he is, where he's impacting so many things about people, so many things about climate, and generally leading and uplifting folks, including myself, in the ecosystem. And so, Taj, welcome, brother.
Absolutely. Toussaint, thank you for this. I look forward to our conversation, and it's been a pleasure knowing you for the last few years, I should say, and definitely looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, no, I'll give you your flowers real time here, because you're one of those folks who, and I think a lot of successful professionals have both formal mentors, and then people who you just look to kind of light the way. I'm fortunate that you have become both now, and even before we got directly connected, I was in the VC Include community, trying to get deeper into the VC Include community, applying, and I came across you and the way you have moved, both for community, for culture, and then what you've done to uplift the planet has been tremendous. And so it's something that I've followed probably much more than you know. I've looked to you as a guiding light, probably much more than you know. So I will thank you real time and give you your props here for continuing to shine in a way that's helpful to me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, it's passed down because the same thing happened for me, and the mentor who influenced me, I didn't even get to meet. His name was Reginald F. Lewis. He's a member of my fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi. He wrote a book called "Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun," and that's what really motivated me to first get into venture, private equity, and venture. And so you're right. There's a lot of times when you have those mentors who are physically next to you, and you have those who are not, but who guide you by the way, by their actions and what they've done. Because that's what Reginald did for me.
No, it's powerful, and Reginald Lewis has absolutely been an influence of mine too. Got an opportunity to meet his nephew Russell, and have become friends with him, both online and in real life. And so, yeah, no, incredible man, who absolutely is lighting the way for a lot of us still. So I have the sweatshirt on. So we're just talking a little bit about some of the things that you have your hand in. We'll give people a sample. So Include Ventures, GP, co-founder of Include Ventures, fund of funds, doing all sorts of things to uplift people, planet, whether that's through managers, through entrepreneurs, through climate. You can talk a little bit about that if you'd like. Doing jobs for the future, JFF. And so that's climate solutions, and really looking at how we bring the future workforce into climate solutions so that we have the people to match the need. And then Aries, you're working with on Crest. You can talk a little bit about that initiative. I'm going down the resume, just looking at all the things that you've done. I didn't realize you had a PhD. You got an MBA. Like I was getting ready for this conversation. I'm like, man, this dude got more impressive as I went and actually looked at the formal resume. So what has you excited? Now talk a little bit about the work that you have going on now before we go backwards and talk about how you got there.
And before we even started, he and co-founder, but here Yasmin Robinson, who actually founded VC Include, and I've been an advisor of VC Include when she founded it. And she and I met during my days at the University of California. And VC Include has morphed into Include Global, which provides grants to climate-focused funds. We did 10 grants last year, GP grants in the US and Europe. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Include Ventures, where I'm a GP, where we make investments in funds, as well as direct investments in startup companies as well. And so that's been really a pleasure and a joy to really kind of change a lot of things that are happening in venture. Because I remember when I first got into venture in 1999, some of the same conversations we're having now was back then about the lack of funding for people who look like you and I in this space. And I just couldn't understand why after 20 plus years that we're still having these conversations, and everything has changed, right? Cell phones have changed, computers have changed, technology has changed. But one thing that did not change is who manages the money. And so that's why we decided to start a fund of funds, which is probably one of the more difficult things to fundraise, anything else. And as you mentioned, we focus on more than climate. So we focus on climate, fintech, edtech, media, and digital health. But of course, for the team. And that leads me to JFF, Jobs for the Future. And I was tapped by them to lead their $25 million project with the Aries Foundation, focusing on the intersection of climate and workforce. And I saw that because as we were making investments in these funds, as we were getting these investments into these startup companies and climate, my concern was, do we have a true pathway for people to get jobs in this space? Not everybody needs to have a PhD. Not everybody needs to have a bachelor's degree to really kind of enjoy what I call green wealth and the building of wealth in the green economy. And so that's one of the things I'm excited about the work with JFF, which I lead a team called Climate Innovations that's focusing on the intersection of climate and workforce. And then lastly, as you mentioned, clean energy culture. I remember when I was a teenager, I'm 48 now, there was an organization called Red Hot and Blue, the Red Hot organization rather, and they came out with these series of albums, America's Dying Slowly, the Red Hot and Blue album, and everything else. And they put these albums out to raise awareness money for the AIDS epidemic back in the late 80s, early 90s. And one of the things we decided to do with Clean Energy Culture is do the same thing. It's staffed and led by the producer of a group called the City Girls that some of your listeners may know, Mr. Key, along with a guy who came from the Obama administration, works at the Sierra Club. So it's the intersection of pop culture and climate. And again, for me, everything's interrelated, because in order for you to talk about climate resilient jobs and workforce, you need the public to know. What's the best way to let the public know these days is who we look up to, our entertainers, our sports figures, and everything else, especially talking about from communities of color. And then lastly, is the capital from Include Ventures, Include Global, and VC Include that comes in and really kind of gives a bounce to the opportunities there for fund managers and founders.
Yeah, no, that is such a powerful, insightful piece of the solution, which is like recognizing how much culture moves action, recognizing how much actually Black voices and voices of color have moved action and have moved the culture of the country, and leveraging that to move culture toward better climate solutions. I think brilliant. So I would we talk a lot about, or I talk a lot about in these conversations about not skipping over the hard stuff. I find that a lot of times it's the stuff that pains us, it's the stuff that we are grieving that really motivates the most concentrated, most powerful action. And so I would love to go backwards and hear how you went from traditional finance and economics and moving toward this venture community to moving into climate, moving into a form of finance that uplifts and impacts people in the ways that you work on now. Like, where does that story start? And particularly, is there a place of pain or a place that may have not been so bright that motivates that?
Absolutely. I think a lot of times in our life it's the darkness that gives way to light. So definitely that's definitely true. The reason why I'm so adamant about diversity, and when I talk about diversity, it's more than race and gender, it's geographic diversity, and it's even intellectual diversity as well. In college, we talk about clean energy culture and working with the City Girls. That's not by happenstance. And given it's the 50th anniversary of hip hop, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a rapper. And my parents were like, "You're gonna rap your butt to college." And so I ended up studying poetry and literature in undergrad, actually, thinking that would be a pathway for me to both satisfy my parents and be able to have these hard bars. But when I got out, needless to say, I did not come up with an album, but I had this immense opportunity to learn how to stories tell. And I understood that benefits sell and features tell. And so those benefits are the stories that we tell about products and services. And I ended up working in banking. I was at Wells Fargo. And I actually started in a grocery store. Back then in the early 90s, they had us in grocery stores. And, when you go get your pizza, you can go get banking services. So people didn't know what to make of that. But it was exciting for me because it was something new. It was something to really kind of break the monotony of what you consider banking. And it really kind of jumpstarted my career. And from there, I went into corporate banking with Wells Fargo, and I spent a total of about 15 years with the bank, from graduation to then. And then I went into investment management with UBS and really enjoyed that space. And that's when I started meeting a lot of people in the sports space and managing capital for people in the NBA and others. And then that transitioned me into private equity, where I started getting a taste of what it means to take the knowledge that you have from consumer banking, from corporate banking, from investment management, and really apply to these alternative assets. The one thing that I noticed that was in private equity venture was that it was, I hate to say it, and maybe it was just the firm I was at, it was more about taking something, breaking it down, and making money from their brokenness. And coming from a place to where a lot of our communities are already broken, I didn't really gel with that. And venture capital was something totally different, because I felt like venture capital took something, and it was almost like the rose that grew from the concrete. It allowed things to blossom where they could not. And so my first foray into venture was at the University of California, where I led both the accelerator and partnered with the fund there in the University of California, Riverside. And then I went to LACI, which is the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator for the city of LA and the county of LA, focusing on building an inclusive green economy, and then subsequently to found my firm, Include Ventures. But when we talk about the pain and the darkness, the thing that got me into climate was twofold. The first piece of that is, I used to be an investor and COO of a fashion company. And we started, we were doing a lot of stuff with the NBA, and we redesigned McDonald's uniforms. But I started seeing the lack of sustainability in fashion. I started seeing how that was impacting communities in Africa and many other places with the work that we were doing, and how it was just detrimental to our communities. So that was the first eye-opening thing. So later on, I invested in a wine company. Same thing. I started seeing how the climate directly was impacting the wine industry. Because what we were doing, we were taking it to where, you had craft beer that was popular with people, and Ciroc and others were popular, and wine was losing its taste because it's still concentrated on the soccer moms and the middle-aged folks. And when we got into wine, we made it to where it was something hip. Snoop Dogg now has a wine, John Legend has a wine, E40 has been in the wine business, and so it was pretty exciting there. But I saw it firsthand how climate impact the wine industry. And then a little bit later on in my career, something happened to me where I realized that climate is more than just about what happens to industries, what happens to cities. It's what happens to us. Me and two of my cousins, we all got kidney failure from environmental factors growing up in Dallas, Texas. And that, for me, that led to stage 5 kidney failure, and I was on dialysis. And when we talk about all the stuff that I've done in the last 7 years, I've done all that while I've been on dialysis every other day. Sometimes taking call, all the times taking call while I'm in dialysis, while I'm in the operating room. And I did that because, and I did so much, I'll be honest with you, because I didn't know how long I had. And my whole thing was, death is nothing to be afraid of, it's something to prepare for. And what I was preparing for was a legacy that I will leave behind, similar to Reginald Lewis. A lot of people don't get the opportunity to do that because they don't know. And I felt like the disease for me was actually a blessing, because it allowed me to really think about that and do it. Unfortunately, 2 of my cousins passed away before they can get a transplant. I was lucky enough to get a transplant this past January, which is why I've been out. So I'll be out for the next few months. But to your point, that experience made me really kind of realize that climate, environmentalism, and sustainability are so important. They are, it's a public issue. I'm walking, living, breathing of that. It's an economic issue, because it's an opportunity for us to actually make money from this transition. And it's a social justice issue, because unfortunately, a lot of the communities that are suffering from the impact of environmentalism, think Cancer Alley in Louisiana, think Flint, Michigan, and the water crisis, think Jackson and the water crisis. They're not the ones who are causing it. It's being caused from somewhere else, and they're doing it. And again, it's not just Black communities. We look at East Palestine that just recently suffered some horrible effects of hazardous materials flying through their area. And so it's poor communities, it's communities of color, it's immigrant communities. And so those are the things that really kind of influenced me to be a champion and a warrior for climate, especially for climate and inclusion and diversity.
And that's so powerful. Yeah. You're an inspiration, particularly as a young man who went to high school in Riverside. Yeah, an absolute inspiration. What gives you so yeah, that's the thing. Obviously, that creates a fire, that creates a sense of urgency to work on these problems, but you don't work on something if you don't have hope that you can move the needle. What gives you hope that we can actually make a dent in this issue, or see a different sort of future?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny when I was at Riverside and at LACI, I couldn't pay people to come down and look at our climate focused founders. Like we were the last things on people's list. There was not a lot. There was an investment community around it and a number of investment, but it wasn't as robust as we see now. But I think something happened after the pandemic in the top of 2020. You start seeing people start thinking about it. And for me, what I thought is people realized that it didn't matter how much money you had on return. It didn't matter anything else. The pandemic slowed everything down. And if the pandemic did that, what could climate do? And so I think that people started thinking about, okay, we're having this huge issue. We could both make money from it, but we can also kind of save ourselves on what may happen. We don't want to go through another pandemic and be on a global scale like what climate can be for a lot of different things, whether it's again health, and we've been hearing more about bacteria that's increasingly growing because the earth is heating up faster than what it needs. And we're in Los Angeles now, and the rain is coming down to fill like 16 Olympic-sized pools in the last 2 days. And so these effects really kind of influence a lot of people in our industry of venture to think about climate and to come this way as well. And so that's what really gives me hope. The other thing that gives me hope too is that one of the things I always talk about is that, and I heard this phrase so many times, that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And I think there are a lot of funders, not just what we're doing, but my fraternity brother Lil Tony, First Close Capital, and so many others that are stepping in and filling the gap, are really kind of putting the checks into people who care, who come from those communities. Like I mentioned, you say you came from Riverside, California. For your listeners who may not know, Riverside is about 40 miles east of LA. So it's not LA, it's heavily Latino, heavily Black. And, a lot of people don't associate with venture capital. There's probably one thing they associated with was Coachella. But, we had Techchella when I was there. But what I'm also proud of is that during my tenure at UC Riverside, we made Riverside the #4 place in the nation for Black and brown entrepreneurs by Entrepreneur Magazine. And the reason for that is we understood that in order to move the needle, you need to have capital, people, culture, and access to customers. And so that's one of the things that we're doing. And again, that's what gives me hope, because a lot of people are looking at things differently, and they're approaching venture capital differently than what it was 20 years ago.
Yeah, no, we Uplifting Capital, we talk about impact alpha. We also talk about inclusion alpha, right? And so if opportunity is not equally distributed, but talent is, like, bringing opportunity to that talent that doesn't have it is an absolute opportunity. Like it's an investment opportunity. It's an opportunity to move the needle on impact. And so I think the recognition of that in places like Riverside and in communities like the Black and brown communities that you are investing in, the recognition of that is important from both an impact standpoint and then also from an investment standpoint. It's incredibly important. So
yeah. Our pitch in Riverside was, in addition to really kind of growing the homegrown companies, and there's a lot of companies that came from Riverside County. A lot of people don't even know Ampere, which is an electric airplane company. One of the co-founders started here, and they were going to have the company here. XOS Trucks, which is an electric trucking company, also was started in Riverside County. And so there's talent here. And again, it's just about access and opportunity. But in addition to really kind of growing the homegrown talent, what we did is recruit from the Bay Area. And my pitch is very simple. You can stay in the Bay Area, raise $10 million, and spend 8 of that on housing and salaries. Or you can come to Riverside and spend $2 million of that on housing and salaries, and have your runway last 4 times as long, because housing is cheaper. There's better situations for your children to go to, or your staff's children. And instead of paying $300,000 for an engineer up in the Bay, because they need to have that just to live, you can pay a third of that in Riverside County and have just the same amount of talent, drive, and gusto to move your company forward.
It makes perfect sense. And with our distributed workforce and the flexible working arrangement, it makes even more sense to look at new geographies. And so, that's incredible. So where should people, if we're thinking about doing something with the resources that we have available to us now, and when, like, we speaking broadly, that could be financial advisors who are listening, that could be high net worth individuals, that could be fund managers who are listening. Like, what resources do we have available to affect both climate change and then also more inclusivity in terms of opportunity to create wealth. Like, what would you suggest people start from where they are?
Yeah, I think the one thing all of us have that leads across all of those job categories that you mentioned is a voice. And there's a voice to learn, there's a voice to promote, and a voice to influence. I used to joke and call, and I still do, used to call myself the DJ Khaled of climate. And the reason for that is that, DJ Khaled, he doesn't rap, barely produces, but what he does, he promotes. He promotes the hell out of people on his records. They take them to number one. And that's why I kind of see my job. I'm no longer, I used to be a founder. I'm no longer a founder. So you hear me shouting out my founders that we've invested in, and founders that I just know, fund managers that I know that we invest in. So that influence is very important. And I think for those people in those job categories that you mentioned, there's a company called My Climate Journey, and people should check him out. The founder of that, his name is Jason Jacobs. He actually used to be in the footwear business and sold his company Runkeeper to ASICS. And again, totally different industry. Had a successful exit, which is kind of sitting around. And he started just learning himself about climate. He was first, it was just like, I don't know what this means. And I just wanted to learn and see, does it make sense? See if what everybody's talking about is true. And he started this organization called My Climate Journey just to answer questions for himself. And that has morphed into a fund, a podcast, a community, and anything else. So his personal inquiry started a whole lot of things in venture. And I think the same thing happened to fund managers. The same thing can happen to investment professionals that are pushing mutual funds that have a sustainability bent. Same thing can happen to bankers who are being cognizant about the products that they're using or products that they're selling. It can be relevant to just any human being that can think about things differently. Whether it's like sustainable hats that I be wearing all the time that are made out of waste material, whether it's low water cotton like the shirt I have on, whether it's the food that we're eating, like going to Kevin Hart's new place that sells plant-based food, because we realize that the growing of beef and other materials is also contributing to the carbon in the air. Whether it's wearing diamonds like these that are made out of carbon, there's a whole slew of things that we can do and actions that we can take that can influence other people. And I think that we have the tools now to do it. Social media has its good and its bad, but one of the good things it has is that it allows you to talk to many different people at a faster rate with a faster number.
Yeah. Now, call those micro acts of courage. Like
yeah.
There's a whole slew of them available to any of us at any given time. You got to figure out what your 1% is. Like what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what should anything that you would ask people to do, imparting any specific micro acts of courage that you would offer, or aside from people getting in touch with you, and we'll have all your information so people can find you, LinkedIn, Twitter, all that stuff. I know you're very active. Anything that you would offer to people or invite for people to do?
First of all, I like that phrase, micro acts of courage. We need more of that because I think that that's going to help. But I would just say, everybody can do things that's beneficial and comfortable for them. You don't have to emulate what somebody else is doing. You don't have to, I think God made us humans, and these humans different for a reason. And so we can all approach the pathway differently. But the first thing I would say though is that just study and learn and see what you desire and what you know. As an example, we look at electric vehicles as a part of clean tech. There are some problems with electric vehicles that we know when it comes to the materials that goes into the batteries and so forth. But for me, I look at that as opportunities. I look at it as opportunities to where now you can have somebody build something cleaner and even more effective than what's currently out there. And so I think that you have to just take a positive stance on it to move the needle forward and to begin to do things like that. Like you mentioned, it's funny. There was a list that just popped up today that says these are the VCs that don't require a warm intro, and I hate warm intros because my thing is like, if you're requiring a warm intro, you're going to get the same type of things over and over. That's almost just like you only read the books that your friends recommend you, as opposed to going out and just opening your mind up and going to the library and picking something you've never seen before and reading it. And I think those of us who are in venture, we realize that those new conversations are valuable. To your point, I'm on LinkedIn, but like I mentioned before, I'm on medical leave to April, so definitely forgive me if it's a little bit slow for me to respond. But Twitter also, we for now, I should say, that we're out there until we find something other. But I think that, I enjoy talking to people because I enjoy learning as much as I enjoy teaching. And I think there's a phrase by an economist called Organsky that talks about an organic intellectual. An organic intellectual takes more in than it gives out, right? And so for me, learning is vastly important, but their learning comes from having these conversations with you and many other people to determine what makes sense for the community and the world.
Mm. Well, certainly, man, appreciate you and the way you move through the community and the world. You come from such a generous place, such a thoughtful place, and you're consistently showing up regardless of what's going on. And so thank you for taking the time today, and thank you for all that you're doing.
Absolutely, man. And I want to leave your audience with this, is that, this podcast like this is something that really inspires me. And I think that we always have to think about uplifting not only ourselves, but each other and people, and mostly strangers. I think the thing that when I came into venture, I think is a little bit differently. I'm from the South, and we have this thing called Southern hospitality, where it is about less being a hole, but more so being helpful, and always kind of caring for your next man. And so I think that if that's one of the traits that we can bring into this space that we're both are in, I think venture capital would be vastly different than what it is and has been.
Indeed. Appreciate you, man.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tucson.
Please be sure to subscribe, like, and click the notification button so you never miss an episode.